I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis about the ransom demand deadline to the Nancy Guthrie disappearance case. These are my speculations.
The Clinical File with John Cordray.
What kind of mindset allows someone to demand $6 million in Bitcoin and then add the phrase, the equivalent of US dollars, as though the wording itself might somehow shield them from scrutiny? That single line in the ransom note stands out immediately as a small but telling crack in the perpetrator's presentation of control. In this episode of The Clinical File, I'll examine the mental health indicators of this case, including the rumors swirling online about the family and the ransom demand itself. As of Monday, February 9, 2026, the ransom deadline of 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time is rapidly approaching, and the current demand stands at $6 million, payable in Bitcoin. The latest updates indicate that law enforcement agencies remain in active posture with no major overnight developments reported. Former SWAT team leaders who have spoken publicly have stressed that investigators fully understand the urgency created by the ticking clock. On February 8th, forensic teams once again spent several hours at Nancy Guthrie's home in Arizona. Sheriff's deputies continue to maintain a presence at the residence at the specific request of the family. Late on Saturday night, authorities conducted a search of the home of Nancy's daughter, Annie Guthrie. Officers were observed leaving the property carrying brown paper evidence bags while wearing gloves. No arrests were made and no significant public announcements followed that search. These investigative steps occurred shortly after the Guthrie family released a carefully worded video statement on social media. Savannah Guthrie appeared alongside her siblings, Annie and Cameron. In a calm but urgent tones, they addressed whoever may be holding their 84-year-old mother. They stated that they understand the demand and that they are prepared to pay the ransom because doing so is the only path that they see to finding peace. The first note had requested $4 million with a deadline of Thursday, February 5th. When that deadline passed without apparent payment or follow-up communication, the second note increased the amount to $6 million and included a warning that further delay would place Nancy in greater danger. A separate note that was sent to the station contained details about the interior of Nancy's home that suggested the writer had been either inside the residence or had access to someone who had. The FBI continues to evaluate the authenticity of both notes and has not publicly confirmed any proof of life evidence. From a mental health perspective, several behavioral patterns emerge when we look at the choices made by the person or persons responsible for these communications. The decision to demand payment in Bitcoin reflects a level of premeditation and technical awareness. Individuals who exhibit strong antisocial personality traits often display this kind of careful planning when they pursue instrumental goals. They organize the logistics of the crime with precision, yet they frequently underestimate the emotional ripple effects or the human capacity for resistance and resilience. Sending multiple notes to different television stations rather than communicating privately with the family introduces a noticeable element. The choice to involve the media suggests the perpetrator may derive psychological satisfaction from seeing the case play out publicly. That behavior can align with narcissistic traits with external validation, or the thrill of being the center of attention outweighs operational security. This appears to be another example of the timeless strategy of attempting to outsmart investigators who literally do this for a living. For the Guthrie family, the psychological burden of facing a hard deadline measured in hours is profound. Trauma literature consistently shows that families caught in genuine or perceived kidnapping situations experience acute stress responses that include hypervigilance, racing thoughts about catastrophic outcomes, and a pervasive sense of the time itself has become the enemy. That knowledge of the 5 p.m. deadline represents a potential point of irreversible change, forces the mind into a state of prolonged high arousal that is exhausting on every level. Public speculation and online accusations towards the family have added a second, equally damaging layer of stress. Rumors questioning the family's involvement or suggesting the entire situation might be fabricated circulate freely, despite the absence of any supporting evidence from law enforcement. When strangers project doubt onto victims, it can produce a form of betrayal trauma. The family loses the protective buffer that social support normally provides, which deepens feelings of isolation, shame, and helplessness. The composed delivery in that family's video statement itself is psychologically significant. Maintaining that level of restraint under extreme pressure is a common coping strategy among people who feel responsible for holding the family together. However, that outward composure often masks an intense internal conflict between hope and preparation for the worst possible news. The escalation of the ransom amount after the first deadline passed without incident reveals a degree of calculated patience on the part of the perpetrator. Rather than reacting impulsively to non-payment, the individual raised the stakes in a structured way. This pattern can be consistent with psychopathic traits in which empathy for the victim's suffering is absent, and the crime is approached primarily as a financial transaction. The complete absence of proof of live evidence in the communication is one of the most concerning behavioral signals. In legitimate kidnapping cases, captors usually provide photographs, short audio clips, or other verifiable signs that the victim is still alive in order to maintain the family's willingness to pay. When that evidence is withheld, several possibilities arise. The perpetrator may be exercising extreme caution to avoid leaving traceable material. A third, darker possibility is that the withholding itself serves as a sadistic function, prolonging the family's anguish for psychological gratification. If the communications are genuine, the repeated use of firm deadlines demonstrates a strong need for control. That need can sometimes reflect underlying feelings of powerlessness in other areas of the perpetrator's life. By dictating terms and watching others respond, the individual temporarily restores a sense of dominance. For the Guthrie family, the uncertainty surrounding the note's authenticity creates an especially corrosive form of limbo. Prolonged ambiguity is one of the most psychological taxing experiences documented in trauma research. It erodes hope incrementally while simultaneously preventing closure, which elevates the long-term risk of depression, generalized anxiety, and complicated grief. Investigative activity continued on Sunday, February 8th, with reports that authorities examined areas around the septic tank on Nancy's property. While no findings have been publicly confirmed, the thoroughness of the search on day 9 of the investigation underscores the commitment of the resources to every possible lead. The sheriff has emphasized that standard protocol requires scrutiny of everyone in Nancy's immediate circle until each person can be definitively cleared. Even though this is a routine procedure, the knowledge that family members are being vetted can place subtle but real strain on relationships already under extraordinary pressure. The motive behind the crime appears to center on financial gain, amplified by the public profile of Savannah Guthrie. Targeting an 84-year-old woman who lived a relatively quiet life suggests a willingness to exploit vulnerability without significant moral hesitation. The lack of inhibition is frequently observed in long-standing patterns of disregard for the rights and well-being of others. The decision to send multiple notes to separate news outlets creates an unusually enthusiastic digital footprint. In some cases, this pattern aligns with histrionic or narcissistic features in which the desire for attention overrides the practical needs for secrecy. The billboard campaign that began spreading across the country over the weekend is both a practical effort to generate new tips and a painful reminder to the family that their private crisis has become even more of a national story. Increased visibility can produce helpful leads, but it also invites more unsolicited opinions and false information that drain emotional energy. If Nancy remains alive in captivity, and we certainly hope she is, the psychological toll on an 84-year-old woman would be severe. Elderly individuals held against their will are especially high risk for disassociation, learned helplessness, and a rapid emotional withdrawal as protective adaptations to overwhelming fear. The family's public statement that they are willing to pay has humanized their plea and may have been intended to encourage compliance from the captor. At the same time, it has opened them to criticism about the timing of their response and speculation about whether paying could incentivize future crimes. That external judgment can intensify feelings of guilt and self-doubt, even when the family is acting in good faith under impossible circumstances. When we begin to connect the behavioral dots, the public nature of the notes, the language about the U.S. dollar, and the absence of proof of life, the structure of escalation of demands, it becomes clear that the perpetrator's apparent confidence may contain the seeds of their own exposure. Overconfidence remains one of the more reliable predictors of eventual forensic difficulties. The same need for control that drives the creation of deadlines and escalating threats can also generate pressure on the perpetrator as the situation draws increased law enforcement attention. That self-imposed pressure frequently leads to errors in judgment. This ongoing case illustrates a destructive collision between greed, detachment, and a desire for public spectacle on one side, and the deep human need for safety, certainty, and support on the other. As our eyes are fixated and glued on this case every day, even within the days, there's new evidence that continues to emerge. We all hope that Nancy is safe and sound. We all hope there is a resolution in a positive way in this case and that the perpetrators are brought to justice. We hope that happens very, very soon. I can only imagine what Nancy may be going through. She's 84 years old. She has medication. Is she getting that medication? Is she getting the health care that she needs? She had that blood drop on her front door. What's going on? Her pacemaker was disconnected. All that is not good. Nancy needs round-the-clock medical care more than likely. The question is she getting that? Is she safe? Is she getting encouragement at all? And does she even know what's going on in the country about her case? So what do you think about the ongoing evidence of this case? It keeps coming up. There's so many different speculations here. And I just, again, want to encourage you, don't place judgment right yet. We don't have all the evidence. There's always two sides of the story. We have to be patient. Don't go online and point fingers at family members. You just don't know yet. Let's wait. Let's hope. Let's pray for Nancy's recovery. So are there any elements of any of the evidence that's standing out to you? This is my third video on this case. If you want to watch my other ones, go back and watch the other two. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.